Hello, I'm Dan Gibson, and this is another question and answer video. Today's question has been asked by several people. What are the origins of the Kaaba? Why is it a cube? Where did the people get this idea from? Did it come from pre-Islamic Arabia? Does it go back to the time of Abraham? So, several people have asked about the Kaaba building. First, for those of you who do not know much about Islam, the Kaaba is a building. It is a cube-shaped building with a large black cloth over it, making it look like a large square black object. Worshippers circle around this cube building during their worship. There are some people who think that the Kaaba building is the black stone itself. That's a mistake they make. So first of all, let's put that idea to rest. The black stone is held in a silver container. It's a small basalt type of stone, maybe a meteorite, or we don't know the origins for sure. Now, long ago during the fighting over the stone, it was broken into 7 pieces. And these pieces are placed in a silver holder, which is attached to one of the corners of the Kaaba building. It's called the Kaaba building because that's what it is. The Kaaba is made of stone blocks. Here's a photo of it with the cover removed. It has a very large, high door in one side, and inside there are a number of pillars. Here are some photos of the inside of the Kaaba building. The royal family here is visiting the inside of the Kaaba. Al-Tabari tells us of a pagan Yemeni king, Al-Tubba, around 400 AD, who marched north out of Yemen. He was upset with the Byzantines, and he was marching up against them. So first he conquered Yathrib, which is known as Medina today. He left a son there to govern the area, and then he marched further north on up to the holy city. A group of men said to the king and to his army, "O king, allow us to lead you to an ancient, largely obliterated treasury which previous monarchs have overlooked, which contains pearls, rubies, gold, and silver. It's in a place called Mecca. Here the people worship and pray." But there were 2 Jewish rabbis who told the king that these men were planning his destruction. King Tubba then asked these Jews themselves, "Why do you not worship at this temple?" The Jews replied, "It is indeed a temple of our forefather Abraham. It is just as we have informed you. But the local people there have placed obstacles between us and the temple. They have set various idols around it, and they shed blood there. They are unclean polytheists." King Tubba then he proceeded onward until he reached Mecca. It was revealed to him in a dream that he should cover over the temple, so he covered it with sheets of woven palm trees. Then in a second dream it was revealed to him that he should cover over it with something better, so he covered it with a simple Yemeni cloth. Then in the third dream, he dreamed that he should cover it with something even better, so he covered it with women's robes and pieces of finely woven Yemeni cloth joined together. Then Al-Tabari tells us that King Tubba was the first person to put a covering over the Kaaba building. I think that all took place in Petra, in Jordan, where it was known as Mecca, that name is associated with both places. Now I find this interesting because this story took place around 400 AD, or almost 200 years before the Prophet Muhammad. Yet we read in Al-Tabari 23 that in the year 91 after the Hijrah, Khalif al-Walid brought a covering for the Kaaba in Mecca. And the people were amazed because they'd never seen the like of it before. This was the first time that they covered up using this cloth. Now, how can this be explained? What's the discrepancy? Wasn't it covered before, and why is there this new thing, down in Mecca? I think the answer is simple. I think the first time the king of Tubba covered up the Kaaba in Petra. It wasn't until 91 after the Hijrah that the Caliph came and he covered up the Kaaba building in Mecca. Remember, as we said in the video Moving the Rock, that there was an inscription near Mecca in Saudi Arabia. That inscription tells us that Masjid al-Haram was built there in the year 78. So this covering was put over the Kaaba just 13 years after it was built in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. So the Kaaba in Mecca now look like the Kaaba in Petra. Now today the covering is called a kiswa, and that new covering is put on every year on the 9th day of the month of Hajj. That is the day the pilgrims leave for the plains of Mount Arafat during the Hajj. Now the question that we have before us is about the shape of the Kaaba. Is there some significance to the shape, this square cube? And if we look around in Mecca and Saudi Arabia, there's nothing there that gives us any clues. Mecca and Saudi Arabia has very little history. There are no ancient temples from pre-Islamic times. There are no ancient inscriptions that give us any clues. But the one clue we have is the shape of the Kaaba building itself. On one side of the Kaaba, the Hatim wall has been attached. And if we check the direction of that wall, so the Kaaba is facing, using that wall as the face, we find out that it faces the original Kaaba in Petra. Now both of these are cubes. The cube in Petra is larger than the one that is in Mecca. The cube in Petra fits the descriptions and the size of the Kaaba building given by Azraqi when he described the Kaaba as it stood during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And every mosque in the first 100 years of Islam faced the Kaaba building in Petra. Can we find an answer to our question about the cube shape in Petra? Now, when tourists pass through the entrance of the gates of Petra, the very first thing they encounter are several large stone-cut cubes. The local Bedouin called them jinn rocks, and there are over 20 of these giant cube-shaped rocks all around the city of Petra, marking out a sacred area. Once you pass these markers, you are then in the sacred area. Each of these markers remind you that the area inside the city is called sacred. It is called sacred because it's forbidden there to kill anything, forbidden to do things, and so if enemies got inside, they were safe. They wouldn't attack each other. So in effect, the city of Petra was a city of refuge for the Arab tribes. The Jews had 6 cities of refuge, but there was only one of these we know of for the Arabs. And so the city had 20 large cubes cut out of stone. So why did the Nabataean people use the cube shape to mark out the sacred area? Well, think about it. 20 huge cubes around the city. In the center of the city was a sacred cube. That cube is right in the city of Petra. And I think it gives us clues to the origin of the cube shape. See, the Muslims trace back the original Kaaba to Abraham. They tell us that Abraham helped his son Ishmael build an altar to God. It's called the House of God. In Hebrew, it would have been called Beit El. And as you may already know, there was a Beit El, or Bethel, already up there for the children of Isaac. But here, according to Muslim tradition, Abraham goes with his son and he builds a house of God, an altar for the children of Ishmael. It's interesting that the shape of the early altars were all cubes, and Abraham worshipped God by building a cube-shaped altar and offering a sacrifice. I believe in time, the cube-shaped edifice became a representative of the God of Abraham. You see, the God of Abraham was everywhere. He did not live in a house. He did not have human or animal shape. That's something the pagans did. The followers of Abraham worshipped a God who had no image, only altars on which the sacrifices were given. And so in Petra, just a few miles from where Abraham grazed his sheep, Abraham built a cube-shaped altar for his son Ishmael and his family to offer sacrifices to God. It is in Petra that the cube shape becomes associated with a symbol for God. And all over the city you will find these symbols. Usually there are small altars, and there you will find these symbols. Each of these symbols uses a cube shape to represent God. These are called by archaeologists and historians, they call them block gods. You see, eventually the cube shape came to represent God himself. In a small altar, sometimes there was one block. Sometimes there were two blocks together representing two gods. Quite a few times you can find in the city of Petra 3 blocks together representing 3 gods, or as some call them, the 3 daughters of God. The Quran clearly speaks to the residents of the holy city, and in the Quran it says, "Believe in Allah and His messengers. Do not say 3. Desist, it is better for you. Indeed, Allah is but one God." They should not say 3, but rather God is one. That's in Surah chapter 4. Now, during the time of the Greeks and the Romans, some people in the holy city gave in to pressure from surrounding nations. For those nations, their gods had faces and shapes and personalities. So sometimes in Petra, one can find a cube god with an added face. This practice was more popular during the time of the Romans. But originally, all that was used was a cube shape to represent God, the God of Abraham. Even the tombs were cut as cubes. They were like great rectangles. Some had some decorations, but if you look at a tomb, it's basically a rectangle, just like the cube. Wherever you find a Nabataean tomb, you usually find it in the shape of a rectangular or a cube. Block gods with no faces, rectangular tombs, giant cubes set all around the city of Petra to mark out the sacred area, and right in the middle of the city, among all the pagan temples such as Dushera and Al-Uzza and Al-Lat and others, in the center of all of these temples, there is a plain cube-shaped structure where the children of Ishmael remembered Abraham. And they remembered that Abraham worshipped a God without a face and without hands. Eventually they became polytheists, but they still remembered Abraham and associated him with the simple cube structure. If you're looking for the origin behind the cube called the Kaaba in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, turn to the city of Petra in Jordan, known as the mother of all settlements, and there you will find the oldest sacred structure is nothing more than a cube-shaped structure to remember the God of Abraham. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another video in the series Questions and Answers.